Chomp.
Hi everybody and welcome back to You Are Supreme Toys. We got a very special unboxing today. We're going to be looking at the newest wave of vintage reissued TMNT action figures from Playmates Toys. Now this is a very nostalgic wave. Me and my brother both got a lot of these figures new as kids for either our birthday or Christmas. And to be honest, these are some of my all-time favorites from the vintage TMNT line. You can't really beat the classics, and I think that's why Playmates has consistently reissued these figures over and over and over again over the past 30 years. So, of course, we have Shredder, we have Leatherhead, Krang, Rocksteady, Bebop, a Foot Soldier, and the guy out of place, Master Splinter. This is a heavy villain wave, and it's kind of surprising that they fit 7 figures into this wave. We've been typically getting about 4 figures per wave, and so far really they've only been the Turtles. I'm very satisfied with the figures chosen for this wave. These figures are representative of the very early stages of the vintage line. In my opinion, these figures and characters set the tone for what the vintage TMNT line would become. One of the greatest things about this line so far is not only are these almost one-for-one identical to the vintage toys in package style, and actual figures and paint apps, they are at that price point. Back in the 80s and early 90s, a Ninja Turtles action figure would range from about $3 to $5 depending on where you bought it. So if you account for inflation, these are $10 a piece. They're like $9.97 at Walmart, and they're about $12 at Target. And there's various other retailers that have them, but stock is iffy. These are not staying in stock. I have seen all of these figures multiple times now, but by the time I go back to the store, they are gone. So if you're trying to get these, go ahead and pick them up. I think they'll be abundant at some point, but if you see them, they're $10 a piece. If you're only picking your favorite, just grab your favorite. You'll be completely satisfied with the product. These things are gorgeous in the package. At a glance, the packaging is almost, to the untrained eye, one-for-one identical to the vintage figures and packagings. The quickest way to determine if you have a vintage carded figure or a reissue is a few points. Firstly, this warning tag on the bottom would not be present on the vintage cards. Secondly, the vintage cards do not have the J-hook that you hang on the peg. The vintage cards would have the little eye hole. And thirdly, every single one of them come with this little tag that's inserted inside of the bubble. Other than that, it's the same exact box art from the vintage figures. The pack out style is pretty much the same as well. The weapons are laid out in the package in the same fashion as the vintage figures would be. And for the most part, even the back of the backer card is pretty much the same. This is the same Origins comic that you would have on the backer card, but the cross sell is different. If you're looking to keep these guys mint on card, $10 price point cannot be beat. It's just insane that you can go to the store today and buy anything for $10, especially an action figure that is almost a one-for-one replica of the vintage figures you grew up playing with. These are perfect for small kids. There are some small parts if you're concerned with that, like the throwing stars in Splinter's package. Now, as far as availability is concerned, it did take me a few trips and a little over a month to track down all these characters. Initially, I found Shredder, Krang, Rocksteady, Bebop, and Leatherhead right away. Then it took me a few weeks to find a Master Splinter, which I had to buy at Target. So he was $12 as opposed to I paid $10 for everyone else. It took me about a month later to stumble upon a Foot Soldier. Foot Soldiers are very popular with army builders, and at $10, people who collect turtles are probably going to buy every single Foot Soldier they come across. So if you want a Foot Soldier and you see it in the store, pick it up, because chances are somebody's going to come along and buy it before you do. So let's go ahead and start taking a look at these guys. One of the best things about the vintage TMNT figures were not only the sculpts and design, but they really went all out back in the day as far as card art was concerned. And the Turtles line really took it up a notch, I think. I was always fond of the card art on these cards. I remember when I would get these toys as a kid, I would spend a good while just staring at this card art before I actually ripped the toy out of the package. Here we have Leatherhead, and unfortunately, I have all the backer cards from my vintage toys growing up still, but we ripped the bubbles off the cards as kids, and we pretty much destroyed the card art. And so we pretty much just kept the backer cards for the bio and to see what new turtles we would want later if we went to the store. I don't know if they have yet. I would very much like to see somebody collect as much of the vintage original card art as possible and maybe make a little book about it. That would be a nice alternative to keeping your figures mint on card if you had a little small book with all the card art for each of these characters inside of it. It is so difficult to open these up. But when am I going to get to open these guys up again like I did when I was a kid? And for the price point, if you want doubles, get doubles. A Marvel Legends is going to cost you $24. Anything is going to cost you $24 now in the toy aisle. So you can get 2 Leatherheads, open up one, put one on the shelf, and then keep the other mint on card and hang it on a peg in your room. Let's take a look at Leatherhead here. As with everybody else, everybody's card back is going to be the same, minus the bio. We've got Leatherhead's Portrait of Leatherhead. Swamp stomping, raging, Cajun gator. Vital gatoristics. Weapons. Turtle trap, swamp gun, jumbo gumbo belt. Birthplace, Florida Neverglades. The favorite songs, Swamp Stomp, Old Man Gator. Favorite food, Cajun Spice Turtle. While scum skulking through the green slimy depths of a rank Florida swamp, a garden variety gator swam through a streak of orange mutagen. Faster than snap, crackle and crunch. This grinning gator mutated into Leatherhead, the biggest and meanest reptile ever to hit the amphibious circuit. Rippling with super mutant strength and swimming ability, Leatherhead enjoys just a pinch of turtle between his teeth and gum for true satisfaction. This garbage can gourmet feels his gullet by trapping turtles, tenderizing them with a blast of his swamp gun, and mixing in a bag of red-hot Cajun spices. Leatherhead is the undisputed king of the swamp, and could be the next sultan of the sewer when Shredder drafts him into the dreaded Foot Clan. Now, I do not know who wrote these bios, but those bios are so sneaking fun to read. They're just absolutely ludicrous, and it just really made these toys that much more fun to play with growing up. So as you can see, Leatherhead comes with 2 accessories, his turtle trap and his gun. They really took strides with the vintage toy line to give each character their own unique spin and characteristics and design, and it just radiates fun. You can tell that the writers and the artists had fun. The sculptors had fun. This was something new. This was something different. It wasn't a G.I. Joe. This wasn't a big bulky man. These were all creatures and creature designs, and they're just anthropomorphic craziness. Let's go ahead and rip Leatherhead out the package and see how he turns out. So here we have our little Cajun Gatorade here. I can notice some immediate differences between this figure and the vintage figure. The paint apps are about the same quality, I'd say, as the vintage figures. They're nothing special. Leatherhead has the opening mouth action feature, which I always loved as a kid. The vintage one, you could pop this upper jaw off. Yep, just like the vintage one, the upper jaw pops right off. It's not hard. The head is actually kind of a softer plastic, probably, than the vintage one. And it pops right on and pops right off. The teeth are painted cleanly. The eyes are a little bit weird looking, but he looks pretty good. His limbs are very soft as well. The vintage turtles have these little cross T pegs in the body, which are notorious for breaking. With the vintage figures, the legs were a bit firmer, so it was easy to, when you're trying to pop the legs off, break these plastic pegs. But this is a very soft, pliable rubber, so that shouldn't be an issue. So he's got 7 points of articulation. He has his tail, his hips, his shoulders, his neck, and his mouth. He stands pretty good. He comes with his turtle trap, which this was always a fun accessory. I loved this accessory as a kid. I can't tell you how often I would pull it apart like that and put it back together. But that's just a fun little accessory. And of course he has his swamp gun, which is like a little short barrel shotgun. And this would fit in his turtle funnel. Fits in very nicely. And of course you can put his trap in his other hand, or you can put his gun in his little belt holster here, which is also a pretty cool option. This belt is very awesome. He's got all kinds of goodies attached to it. I always loved looking at this belt when I was a kid. He's got hooks right there, a giant crawfish, a turtle that has met his demise. I don't know what this is, some kind of like grass. And then he's got some shotgun shells and a pouch on his front. That might be his Cajun sauce. The belt is removable. It's got a little snap right there, and on there has a little gator belly button. I always like that little feature they put in there. They put that guy's belly button on the giant alligator man. This vest has little straps painted down on the front, and then of course he's got his busted gator jeans with a drawstring strap. This was always a fun character. Leatherhead here was actually one of my brother's figures. And here is the vintage Leatherhead for comparison. Now, this is kind of crazy. This is my brother's original Leatherhead. He has been played with. He's in rough shape. He's missing paint on his hat and his teeth. And his little trap is broken. It is split right there at the jaw. And it is worn out from me playing with it and chewing on it. Apparently I chewed on this thing when I was a kid. So if you want to compare, the colors are almost identical on these things. That being said, the plastic firmness is almost also identical. It's crazy how close to the vintage original one this accessory is. The untrained eye would not be able to tell the difference at all. One thing where you could tell, right here on the end of the trap, where this little plastic piece meets the actual trap, you'll see these little half cylinders on the vintage one, and they are just clean straight down half cylinders. And if you look at the new one, you'll see that there's like a little roll down from where the cylinder meets this flat piece, right there in the gap, right there where my fingernail is. So that's the quickest way to determine if this is vintage or not. Shotguns, again, so close in color, so close in sculpt and design. It makes me wonder if they actually found the vintage mold for this figure. I cannot see any difference between these two items, other than the newer one is ever so slightly a different shade of plastic. Alright, I see this. The safety on the butt of the gun is slightly bigger than the one on the newer one. You'd have to have a vintage one next to the new one to actually tell that difference. Now, as far as the actual figures are concerned, the immediate difference is the newer one is a darker plastic. Also, the arms and legs on the vintage one are a lot firmer. This is very soft plastic. The belt is obviously a different shade of orange from the newer one, and it is also a lot softer. This one is soft too, but it's not quite as soft as this one. The vintage one is very light orange, and this vintage Leatherhead is still, like, his paint is worn, but he's still a very sturdy figure. And of course, his jaw comes off too. I used to do that all the time. I can't see any real differences in the paint apps, except for, like, you know, the color. But they have him just about 1-for-1 as far as paint is concerned. I don't see anything out of place. So this is a great alternative to tracking down a complete vintage figure. Next we have Master Splinter here. And again, the card art is pretty much identical to the vintage figure. I always like the way they packed him out like he was holding his bow and arrow. The portrait of Splinter. The good guy leader. Vital ratistics. Weapon, ninja bow. Sword cane, ninja stars. Birthplace, Osaka, Japan. Age, unknown. Previous forms. Hamato Yoshi. Homo sapien. Sewer rat. Splinter. The rat mutation of Ninja Master Hamato Yoshi is the turtle's Shidoshi, teacher of the warrior ways of enlightenment. As a man, and still as a sewer rat, Splinter has a special fondness for the arts, especially martial arts. He also digs the underground, since his rat-like abilities make him quite a burrower. This mystical rat uses his cunning as well as his bow and sword cane to thwart the Evil Foot clan. Splinter trained the turtles to fight for truth, justice, and an equal portion of food. Now, this was another one of my brother's action figures. I vividly recall him getting this Splinter and just freaking out and loving it. It was really a cool action figure. He had that little sword cane, which was fun. So let's go ahead and pop him out real quick and see how he holds up. Alright, we got Hamato Yoshi himself out of the package. Let's take a gander at him. Of course, he has swivel wrists, swivel neck, shoulders move, and he has the hinging legs, which is funny because he's one of only a few of the vintage figures that only have the swivel at the leg instead of the ball joint. But he also has this little tail that swivels as well. There's some paint rub on the front of his nose. Don't really like that. And his eyelashes are on fleek. Look at that. He's very ratty. Stands pretty good. Of course, he's going to, his tail, if you move his tail out of the way, he won't stand very well. But you got his tail pointed down, he'll stand no problem. Got his bow and arrow right here. Now, I'm surprised at how firm this plastic is. If you watched my storage shell turtle review, you will know that the weapons for the reissued storage shell turtles were a softer, pliable plastic. And these are actually pretty much the same firmness as the vintage accessories for Master Splinter, which is it's okay, but it's kind of disappointing. I had hoped that they would have continued with the softer plastic weapons, which I felt like was an improvement. Of course, they are still on the sprue, just like the vintage Master Splinter's weapons, which are on the weapon rack. I never really understood how to use the weapon rack, and I think we pretty much threw away our weapon racks after we cut the weapons off as a kid. So I don't know. Do you count the weapon rack as part of the toy as an accessory, or do you count it as just like a throwaway piece? Because I don't think a lot of people kept the weapon rack, as like I said, it's not even really practical to use as a weapon rack. It barely stands, and I never once thought at all of that as a weapon rack to hang weapons on as a kid. I just thought of it as a giant chunk of plastic. So let's bring in my brother's vintage Master Splinter here. This is my brother's original Master Splinter. The vintage Master Splinter has the paint on his teeth painted buck-toothed, and the newer one has just the single painted tooth. Of course, the vintage one has no pupils painted on, whereas this one has the pupil and the eyelashes are very prominent. This is more, I feel like more comic styled painted eyes, and I like the vintage one's paint apps better. The newer one is also a lighter plastic than the original. There is still a date stamp on the bottom. This is actually the mold from 2013. I guess most of these figures are from 10 years ago. The peg on the bottom of the foot is a lot bigger on the reissued one, as well as it has that little WL3052 stamp. But other than that, it's almost identical. The joints are firm on Master Splinter here. There's nothing soft or pliable, and is probably just about the same level of firmness as the vintage in every aspect. I don't see any difference in that regard. Of course, the robe is a lot thinner and a lot cheaper material than the new one, which is more of a felty, has a felt outline. If you look at the bottom, it's like a mesh with a felt on the surface, which I think looks better. The belt is removable. His chest is paint, has that gray paint on it. Nothing on his back is painted. The belt is a very pliable rubber, very soft, pegs into place very well. The figure is easily differentiated from the new and vintage. I don't think you're going to really mix it up. The paint apps just aren't the same. The color and glossiness of the plastic is not the same. The type of material the cloak is made from is not the same. The belt is almost identical, but I feel like the new one is a lot softer than the vintage one. If we compare the vintage accessories, you'll immediately notice the difference in color. The vintage bow and arrow is a lot more amber colored, where the new one is a very light plastic, very light caramel brown, and this one's just very dark. And that's consistent with all the accessories, even with the cane sword, which is probably one of the coolest accessories in a toy I've ever seen. The newer bow is actually somewhat thinner right here at the handle. The vintage one is just a tad thicker, but from the front, the newer one is wider than the vintage one. So it's not really hard to tell the weapons apart. This is a very acceptable alternative to the vintage figure, I think. And as I mentioned, $10, you can't beat that. Alright, next we're going to look at the Foot Soldier. I did not have the Foot Soldier new as a kid. I did eventually find one loose at the flea market as a kid, so I did get to have a Foot Soldier. In fact, a couple. But yeah, I didn't get the experience of opening this guy up new as a kid. His card art is kind of basic. It's just got him in a couple standard poses. Portrait of Foot Soldier, Shredder's right-hand mummy. Vital mumtistics. Weapons, turtle shell biter, electroshock mace, turtle carver knife. Birthplace, Catacomb, Nebraska. Foot soldiers are all alike, speechless robotic minions to Shredder, the evil foot leader. Their mummified movements, turtle shell armor, made from unfortunate relatives of the turtles, and radioactive eyes make these skeletal scumballs truly horrible additions to the Foot Clan. Many foot soldiers have stumbled over the ninja-trained turtles, and many have been destroyed. Still, they are formidable foes because of their sheer numbers. Their high-tech weapons, like the shell biter, can crush the turtle's protective covering and get to the real meat. Yeah, I'm excited to get this guy out, so let's pop him open and see what it's like. Here we got our Foot Soldier. He looks good. I was always a fan of this design of the Foot Soldier. This is more closer to what they were like in the animated series. But, you know, it's got that special Playmates style to it. This is one of just a handful, if not just a couple, of the vintage Turtles toys where the hips do not have ball sockets. And alternatively, it's the actual upper arms that have the little ball sockets on them instead of the hips, which is interesting. I don't know why they did it that way. Maybe because his weapons are a little bit larger and require a little bit more slightly dynamic poses to use. But I actually had one Foot Soldier break right here at the hip, and I had to fix it as a kid with a screw. His head is on a ball socket. Huh. And that joint is very tight. Or at least it feels weird. Like really loose. Be careful with that. I could see that breaking with misuse or play. And of course he has the ball socketed upper arms and then swiveling forearms with these pads glued to them. These pads are a hard plastic. He's only got 7 points of articulation, which is pretty good. And then he has his weapon rack with his weapons. Like I noted with Master Splinter, his weapons are still a very firm plastic, almost just like the vintage figures. Bring in the vintage Foot Soldier I do have. I do not have all of the vintage Foot Soldiers pieces. think this this clamp and the knife is the only thing I have left. But if we get a good look at these guys, we can see some obvious differences. First off, the size of the foot emblem on the forehead is drastically different. It's a different design as well as bigger on the vintage. The vintage one is a darker purple. The eyes on the vintage one are yellow, whereas they're sort of like a greenish yellow on the new one. The forearm pauldrons are a darker blue on the vintage figure, as well as somewhat slightly more detailed, I think. They also look... It looks like the newer ones are a tad bit longer. Everything that is painted on the original is painted on the reissue. And the sculpt is pretty impeccable. If you have a vintage collection of turtles and you're having a hard time finding decent foot soldiers to army build, these reissues are perfect for this. $10, go get as many as you can find and have you a nice little foot soldier army in your vintage collection. These sculpts are pretty much on par with one another. They are definitely different molds. As you can see, the mold lines on the shoulders for the vintage figure are more curved in and out, whereas these are straight on the reissue. A lot of people have assumed that Playmates still has the actual molds from their vintage turtle figures, and this just is not the case. If we look at the new one, his date stamp is 2013, so these molds are 10 years old, but they are not the same molds as the vintage figures. The technology these days is so amazing that they can take a vintage figure, put it in a 3D scanner, scan it, have 3D outputs made, and then new molds that are almost to the T exactly the same as the vintage recreated. And that's what these companies are typically doing. But anyway, let's take a look at the weapons. Alright, this is the vintage clamper. Immediately, if you're concerned about getting these mixed up, the new weapons are such a darker plastic. They're dark gray, whereas the original is a very light gray. I do wish that, like I mentioned before with Master Splinter, that they would have kept making these accessories a softer plastic like they did with the storage shell turtles, because you are going to see stress marks and creases, and you will break these weapons with significant play, especially the thinner pieces like this flail right here. Alright, so here we have the vintage clamper, which is the light gray, and then the dark clamper. The band on the vintage one is slightly wider. And so is the actual pole. The pole is actually wider on the vintage one as well. Then we have his little electroshock mace here. I am missing this accessory from the vintage one. It is a very firm plastic. It's got some wiggle to it, but if you play with it, like this little stress mark right out of the box on the end, you will eventually break these. And of course, he comes with the same knife, I believe, that comes with Rocksteady. Maybe not exactly the same. I can see people mixing these accessories up, but there seems to be enough of a difference in the tip of the knife where you should be able to differentiate it. This is a pretty firm figure as well. He's not exactly soft in any position except for that head neck. That neck right there is just really wonky. Of course, I guess the neck on the vintage one's like that too. Huh. So maybe that won't be too big of an issue. See how he holds his accessories. It's pretty tight fit. The flail's probably only going to fit in the left hand. This is not as wide as a grip as the vintage one on his right. As you can see, the hand on the vintage one is way more open. So it's kind of difficult to get him to hold it, but you can get it in there. Or you can give him his knife. I was also missing the knife, I guess, from the vintage one. It works pretty good. And if you, for some reason, want to buy these just to give the weapons to your vintage figures, I don't know why you would do that, but you can. They will work with your vintage figures. Actually fits in probably a lot better than the actual vintage weapon. Yep, the vintage weapon's a little bit harder to fit in his arms. But there you go. I would say that's an excellent reproduction of the vintage foot soldier. I give that one an A+. Next, that brings me to the mighty Shredder. I got both Shredder and Krang the same day. I want to say it was Christmas, but it could have been my birthday. It might not even have been any day. It might have just been my parents being awesome. They did not keep us from our turtles, that's for sure. And we got them regularly. I specifically got Shredder and Krang. I can't remember what my brother got that day. But for some reason, I guess my parents always thought I was the villain, so they bought me the villains. Even as a kid, I thought it was weird that he did not look very much like Shredder from the cartoon. Shredder from the cartoon did not have a bare chest, and his colors were a little bit different. This is just a weird design. His actual brow and eyebrows are painted on the rim of the helmet. I don't know why they did it like that, but it makes him just the most unique and ridiculous interpretation of a character that you could ever think of. A lot of people will say that he's probably one of their least favorite turtle figures from the vintage line, but for me, I have a lot of nostalgia tied up with this guy. His card art was early on in the series, so it's kind of basic. It's just him knocking through stuff and jumping around. Of course, he's got his portrait on the back. Portrait of Shredder, the bad guy leader. Vital statistics, cutting armor, sword, ninja stars, fist, daggers, and kama. Birthplace, Osaka, Japan. Shredder is the hideous, gruesome, and all-around bad guy leader of the Foot Clan, the organized band of evil ninjas. This lowlife came to power when he betrayed his ninja master, Hamato Yoshi, now Splinter. Shredder wants nothing more than control of the world, and to get there, he'll stop at nothing, even if it means grating his victims like cheese with his razor-sharp armor. The obstacles in his path are none other than the turtles, and he means to destroy them. Shredder fights a never-ending battle against truth, justice, and the American way. Basically, he's not a nice guy. Alright. Shredder, not a nice guy, what? It's crazy. One of the most iconic villains of the 80s and 90s. He's right up there with Skeletor and Cobra Commander and Megatron. One of those key, never forget 'em kind of villains. Interestingly, a throwaway villain in the original comic who had, came back from time to time, but in the cartoon and in the toy line and in a lot of other interpretations of the media, he is the big baddie. He's even fought Batman these days. It's crazy. But anyway, pretty basic looking. Let's go ahead and pop him out of the package. Alright, got the Shredder out of the package. Got his crazy brow right here. That just made him look like insane. He just looks like a crazy, insane man. And I love it. Looks pretty good. He's got his head articulation, his head swivel, his shoulder swivels. He has a twist at the wrists. He always had this weird hand. It's just like this one's like throwing something and this one's about to throw something. So it's just an interesting design. Of course, he has his belt buckle. It's a soft rubber. You pop that open. You see them crazy abs. Like, what kind of human is this guy? Look at that sculpt. I always thought that was crazy. He's got like all the musculature and then his crazy back spine. I always thought that was weird. How his spine like shows through his skin. It's like he's just very ill, but very fit. And of course, as you can see from the date stamp, this is also the 2013 mold. He has his ball jointed hips, and he is a taller character. So in order for him to fit in the package, they had to sculpt him sort of in a squatty pose, like he's doing a ninja attack. But just like the foot soldier, you know, they would typically be tall figures if you could stand them straight up. Much taller than the turtles, which I appreciated. But, you know, he's just always in this weird pose, which is always difficult. It was always difficult for him to stand with this pose. Of course, I don't know how you would do him. You could have his belt over his waist with his cape free flowing. That's probably how I'll display him. I think that's how I prefer it, because it just looks weird if it's tied around and all you see is his chest. And of course he has his weapons rack with all his weapons, his katana and fist daggers and stars and a kama, which is this weird hooked thing right here. And as with Splinter and the vintage figures, this is a hard, firm plastic, which I'm still disappointed about, but it is what it is. Let's bring in the vintage shredder and do some comparison. I have him all decked out with his weapons. This is my original shredder that I got that day, and he stands a lot better than the reissue. I don't know, it's the way his feet are positioned, but he stands way easier. This one's leg is spread way out. His left leg is splayed way out, whereas the vintage one, it is cut in. There's absolutely no way you should be able to trick anybody into thinking that this reissue is the vintage figure, because look at that. That leg is 100% different. The sculpting on the armor is different. I mean, even the spikes on the armor is different. The biggest thing I noticed immediately was the brow and face on the new one is all painted, and his eyes are painted white with pupils, and the vintage one is not painted. The head is molded in a flesh plastic, and the helmet is painted blue, the face mask is painted purple, and the eyebrows are painted on with the pupils. And the reissue is a blue head with all the other colors painted on. I actually like the face on both of these guys for different reasons. This guy definitely pops. He's going to look amazing on a shelf. The belt on the reissue is a lot softer than the belt on the vintage figure. You'll see the spikes on the shin guards and the arm guards are different lengths and protrude differently, as well as the spikes on the shoulder are slightly different. I mean, there's absolutely no way you could confuse the two. They're so drastically different. This is almost a completely different figure, in my opinion. Now, this is the cloak for the vintage figure. Just like Master Splinter, it's very thin, cheap material, but I always liked it because it's very wavy, you know. It's not firm in any way. It kind of forms to the figure. It is stressed out quite a bit. I've played with this thing so much that, you know, I'm surprised it hasn't torn. The new one, just like Master Splinter, is a more felty cloak. As you can see, it's grid pattern on the bottom, but felt on top. I like the material, but it doesn't flow as naturally. It does sit there very well, though. I prefer the vintage material on the vintage shredder as opposed to the new one, where vice versa, I would prefer the felt material on the Splinter figure. You can immediately tell the color is different on the weapons, so there's absolutely no reason to confuse the two. The color is a darker caramel on the vintage and a lighter one on the reissue. Other than that, they're pretty much identical. I don't see a lot of key differences, though some of the sculpting is different. Of course, the ninja stars, if you're like me, when you were a kid, you'd just find these things in random corners of the house. These ninja stars got everywhere. I've even bought boxes of toys from the flea market when I was a kid, dumped them out, and there would almost guaranteed be a ninja star, one of these ninja stars, in the stinking box. It didn't matter what it was. Some kid dropped his ninja star and it got stuck in a crevice of the box or something, and I wound up with it. Shredder is kind of finagly, as he only has one holding hand and he only has 2 fingers open in the hand. So it was always weird trying to give him weapons to hold. So 9 times out of 10, I just didn't give him anything. But he can hold his accessories. They're just kind of wonky. For instance, the vintage one can hold his kama, but it just doesn't look right. It looks like he's trying to throw a ninja star, but a ninja star doesn't really fit in the hand very well. You kind of like gotta fudge it between the fingers, and even then it doesn't want to stay. If I had one nitpick about the new one, that it would be his leg. His legs are different. As you can see, because of the way his legs are, he is slightly taller than the vintage one. But that's the reissued Shredder. Okay, next up we have Krang, the giant brain alien. Now, as I said, I got this guy right along with Shredder. So right out of the gate, I had the 2 most important villains to play with my Ninja Turtles. So I was happy about that as a kid. This figure still looks great to me. I always loved that he had his own little walking chair with legs and arms. It was a disappointment that he was not like the animated version, but then I sit there and think, well, he wasn't exactly based directly off the animated version. Playmates really did a lot of their own thing with designs and details. So, although I'm not exactly privy to why he was in a walker instead of his android body, it is cool that he has his walker. If I remember correctly, his first appearance in the show, he wasn't in an android body. Maybe he had his walker in the first few episodes that he was in. I loved the card art of this figure when I was a kid. It's pretty cool when they're able to inculcate the actual figures, gimmicks, and accessories into the art. So he had this gun in the package, and as a kid I was like, well, what does he do with this? Well, obviously he sucks brains out. So you can imagine I did this a lot to the Ninja Turtles. I just put the little cup of the brain drain gun on their head because it fits perfectly, and drain their brains. I really like this card art though. This image right here in the bottom. It's hard to see, but it really looks cool. He's torturing a poor little turtle. He really doesn't care. This wound up being, I say this a lot, like one of my favorite figures, but it's really hard to pick a favorite figure from the vintage turtle line. There are so many favorites in the line. They're just such good toys and such good figures. And so many of them had so many interesting and cool features that were fun to play with. It's got a little portrait here.
Portrait of Krang, the bodiless burbling brain, vital braintistics, weapons brain drainer, mobile life support system, mechanized arms, birthplace Dimension X. Favorite phrase, home is where you hang your hat.
That's funny.
Hobby, phrenology. Krang is all the brains a body could want. Unfortunately, Krang ain't got nobody. He is, however, the mastermind behind Shredder and the Foot Clan. Krang's rantings, burbling, quarreling, raving antics are a few of the reasons he was banished from his home sweet home of Dimension X. Now Krang brings his smarty pants attitude to the decent planet Earth, where law-abiding citizens are threatened by his supreme intelligence. Krang also supplies Shredder with his controversial retromutagen, the transformation substance which is instrumental in their conquests. Krang's tentacles allow him to wrestle with his biggest headache, the turtles who pose a threat to his global dominance.
Anyway, I love this guy. I like the little mechanized walking machine, and let's go ahead and pop him out of the package and see how he looks. Alright, here we got Krang. He's got his brain drain gun and his 2 mechanized arms and then his hose. He always had this little hole in the bottom of his body. I don't really know why, other than to save on plastic. I used to stick him on my pinky finger, or my fingers were probably a lot smaller then. I used to stick him on my finger and use him as like a finger puppet. And eventually, my original, I think I shoved a marble inside of his body and it got stuck in there. And he only has 2 points of articulation. His little tentacles move up and down. I always liked the paint apps on him, even as a kid. The fact that they sat there and painted all these veins blue was neat to me. Of course, his pupils are just a yellow and his teeth are white. Pretty basic little figure. Of course, his little mechanized walker, it just, opens and closes. The original I used to just pull off like that all the time, and it's pretty easy to take off. Be careful, this plastic will crack and break if you play with it too roughly. So be mindful of that. Let's see if I can do that here. Oh, there we go. And of course, he has his legs on his walker, which are like a ratcheted mobility. So it's not too tight on the top. The knee is kind of tight, but it's also a ratchet. So he's got a pretty good range of mobility there. Of course, nothing on the ankles, but you're not going to be able to stand him except for in certain ways because of the weight of his head. Of course, he has his little arms. And this is interesting because this goes back to what I was complaining about with everybody else. His arms are actually a pliable plastic, and so is his brain gun. They're not firm, and that annoys me because that means they could have did that with everybody else, and that would have been so much better. I mean, as you can see, there's a giant stress mark right there on the arrow of Splinter's bow. But these simply just peg into place, and they're very soft, so they go on pretty easy. A lot easier than the vintage one. So that's a good thing. And then, of course, he can hold his gun. Because of the flexibility of the plastic, it won't matter really which hand he puts it in. But the gun will probably be warped. You can heat that up and straighten that out if you want. And then it comes with this little hose. And I always wasn't sure exactly how to do this, but I always plug the male end of the hose right there into the base, that little hole in the base, and then the female end into the peg on the brain drain gun. So there you go. The actual original vintage Krang. This is partly my original, and by that I mean this Krang in the seat I don't think is my first Krang. I still have him somewhere, but as you can see there's no marble in the hole, and I'm pretty sure my original one had a marble stuck in there. So this is him. We take the 2 brains out, you'll be able to quickly tell a difference. The vintage one is a lighter pink plastic, almost like a bubble gum, and the veins on his head are a light blue instead of this dark blue. Other than that, the teeth and the eyes are almost identical. The hole's about the same size, but as you can see there's a little ring around the outside part of his hole. As you can see, the shielding on my vintage one has yellowed and has lots of play wear. You can see all the blue marks from where Krang was bouncing around on the inside, scratching paint. You'll notice some paint variations in this chair. The colors are pretty close though. The red right here on the new one is a darker red. And if you turn it to the side, you'll notice that the big hose right there is purple on the vintage and it's red on the new one. So they inverted the color of the hoses on this side. The rivets are bigger on the newer one. Let's see, the date stamp is 2013. On this one, it's very shallow though, you can't really read it. And this one is 1989. So here's some key differences. This is a harder plastic. The arms are a harder plastic. And you'll notice that the peg hole for the peg on the body is shallow. So you can only plug it in so far, and when you first get this guy, it's kind of difficult to put him in there and actually keep it in place. The arms tend to fall off a lot on the vintage figure. You'll also notice that the peg hole on the arms, goes all the way through. And since this is a softer rubber, it pegs on so much tighter, and those pegs are a lot more pronounced on the new one. I like the pink better on the new one. And in fact, I probably like the blue too. So the new one's like top notch. Now typically you'd find this guy loose. He's going to be missing his arms. He's going to be missing his weapon. You're probably going to find Krang himself and with no walker. And if he has the walker, it's probably going to be missing all the accessories to it. If, in fact, you might even find the walker without Krang and without its accessories. It always annoyed me how easily these arms fell off the vintage one. And of course, that hasn't changed. So I'm actually pleasantly surprised with the quality increase on the reissue. It keeps that vintage look and feel, but it gives you a little bit more stability with the ratcheted limbs and the softer plastic arms and weapon. So I'm happy with this guy a lot. Like this guy's gonna look so much better on a shelf than this old worn out fella right here. I would like to see them reissue the giant android body that this Krang can actually fit in. That would be pretty cool for them to do, because I never had that as a kid. I always wanted that. So yeah, that's Krang. He looks great. Awesome. Still love this vintage one though. And next up, we got Bebop. I didn't get Bebop new as a kid. This is one of the ones that, I don't know, we just didn't get. I did eventually find him at a flea market. As I mentioned with Krang, I like how they inculcate the accessories into the card art so you kind of know how to use the toy. Like right here, they have his little drill gun drilling through the actual TMNT logo, which is pretty cool. They did paint him with his pink face. I believe there were some early versions that didn't have the face painted. I know that there are varying degrees of pink paint on the faces of the vintage figure, and this guy, like the rest of the figures, has been reissued so many times that there are a lot of ways to tell the vintage from the reissues. Got a little portrait here.
Portrait of Bebop, powerhouse punk enforcer for the Foot Clan. Idle punktistics. Weapons, turtle shell drill, garbage can shield, knife. Birthplace, Hollywood. He's 19 years old? What? No way. Previous forms, punk gang member Warthog. Bebop is the mutant punk rock hog who could slam dance his way through any crowd. This roadhog warrior dares to shave his head in blatant opposition to the establishment and his parents. Behind his mohawk ponytail, cool shades, and all-star tennis shoes lurks the heart of a pig, ready to pulverize the turtles. Guided by the evil Shredder, Bebop is willing to roll in the mud to snort out the turtles. His two turtle shoulder pads cover a grotesque array of safety pins, tattoos, and junk food. Always at his side, the shell drill serves as a constant reminder that the party's not over until every turtle lies on its back.
I'm excited to get him open, so let's go ahead and pop him out. Alright. Got this gorgeous little guy here. Love his pink face and his mohawk and all his little emblems. He's got this turtle shell, but there's actually a skeleton of the turtle's head and arms on there as well. And that's mirrored over to the same side. He's got this chain around his wrist, skull, necklace, wrist gauntlets, chain belt. Got his little pigtail on the back. And, you know, some details you just really don't notice until you look at it. Like he's got this like knee brace for some reason. He's got his head swivels, his arms swivel, his wrist swivel, and of course his legs are on these ball joints. He stands pretty easily. He's got his little sprue of weapons. He's got his shield, his drill gun, and his knife. And they are a hard plastic, just like the vintage figure. And this isn't so much a weapon rack, other than just junk at this point. Now his hands are kind of tight looking. I don't know how easy it's going to be to fit his gun in any of these hands. Not well. Alright. Oh gosh, these are tight. Okay, it's more likely going to fit in his left than it is his right. And then his shield is just his handle, so that shouldn't be too bad. Just slides in like that. Of course, you could also have his knife. I always wish that he had a belt or something to stick his knife in, but he does not. He does not have it. Let's see how he holds it though. Can he hold it? Yep, he holds the knife pretty decently for what it is. But I always wanted his gun. Never had his gun, I don't think. As I said, I do have the vintage one. It's just not when I got new. This one was played with quite a bit when I got it. Firstly, if you look at his shield, the plastic is a lot darker gray than the newer one. You will notice the details on the knife are different. This has more chinks and serrations in the actual knife. The paint apps are so different. Firstly, the color is so much darker on the new one. And then you'll notice that the bracelet on his right hand and the chain on his left hand are both painted. The paint on his vest is a lot more maroon in the reissue. It's more of a red in the vintage. You can see how drastically different the pink on the face is on this vintage figure. It's almost shallow even. This one's very prominent. The legs and pants on the new one have absolutely no paint apps. And there's a lot of things that you could paint on this figure. The vintage one's legs were made of that brown plastic, so the actual pants are painted, the shoes are painted, and the chain belt is painted. Nothing is painted on the reissue. Even the tail on the vintage one is painted. So they skipped a lot of paint apps on this particular figure. Why? I'm not particularly sure. Must have been a cost-cutting measure, and they put so much into everybody else looking just like their vintage counterparts that I guess they chose Bebop to be the one to cut cost on, which is kind of a shame. But you could always customize him if you want to and paint him up to look proper. The date stamp on the reissued Bebop is actually 2015, so it wasn't too long ago that this mold was used. But the sculpt is pretty identical. There's not a lot missing. I don't see anything really missing at all. They captured everything as closely as possible with that mold, like everybody else so far. And they just really cheapened out on the paint apps for the legs. Other than that, this is a great looking figure. That's the mighty Bebop right there. And last but not least, we have Rocksteady. Between Bebop and Rocksteady, Rocksteady is probably my favorite. He was the one I got new as a kid, and I played with him literally to his death. My first Rocksteady fell completely apart, and his horns were chewed off from me chewing on his horns as a kid. Again, I like the card art on this figure. He's sitting there chewing on turtle shells up here for some reason. Portrait of Rocksteady, Mutant GI Mauler and Shredder's #1 thug. Vital rhintistics, weapons, retro mutagen gun, manhole cover shield, turtle carver knife, birthplace, La Brea tar pits. Previous forms, military punk rhinoceros. Rocksteady's tough rhino body makes him a turtle bashing powerhouse. His lack of smarts make him dangerous. This mutant mammal is big trouble with his retro mutagen gun. One shot can level a whole building or a shelled turtle. Off duty, Rocksteady loves to fry up a mess of juicy turtle burgers for the whole Hungry Foot clan. Rocksteady's field glasses survey the area for anything that looks like a turtle. He's mistakenly blasted 6 soccer balls. This GI Rockhead blatantly displays his victory kills with the turtle scalps he wears around his belt. I didn't know turtles had scalps. And those look like turtle shells to me, but whatever. So yeah, I love this guy. I'm going to go ahead and rip him out because I'm ready to rock. Okay, here we got Rocksteady. Turns at the neck, shoulders, his wrists swivel, and of course he's got his ball joint hips. He has his turtle belt, which is really soft plastic. Just plugs together right there through that little loop. He's got his weapons on his weapon rack. Of course, this is... These feel a little bit not as firm as, like, say, everybody else's, but they're definitely still firm. But we got his gun here. Always fit it there. I always love this shield. It's just such a cool little accessory. A manhole cover is just a fun idea for a shield. Fits in his hand pretty good. And I always took his knife and, like, shoved it in his belt back there. So he was always decked out when I played with him. He stands reasonably well too. He does have some paint rub on the back of his shirt. These are cheap $10 figures. They're not going to sit there and try to QC everything to death. I mean, even the vintage toys had markings and stuff out of the package, so it's not that big a deal. I do not like those little marks on his knees, though. I guess that's where the sprues in the mold came off, and they had to cut them off, so they just look really bad there. He's got some light camo around his pants, little green spots and stripes, not a lot. His shirt's painted, his hat's painted. So this is my second Rocksteady that I got as a kid. And you'll notice some slight differences. He's actually pretty close to the original. But, of course, his accessories are a darker plastic, just like Bebop's on the vintage figure. The eyes on the vintage one are more of a dark pink with pupils, and the new one is like a light pink. The green is a darker green on the helmet. I like the vintage belt better. I think there are more details in the turtle shells. The new one's kind of thinner, and the old one is a little bit more thicker. I think there's more give in the new one than there is the old one. And you'll notice that the camo on the pants is much more significant on the vintage figure. It's got the black and the green on it, so they kind of cut corners there. They did continue to paint the shoes. Like Bebop, they did not paint the bracelets on the arms, where the vintage one has them painted. He's pretty much one for one as far as the sculpt's concerned. He's just missing some paint apps on the new one, which is a shame. I would have paid an extra $2 for these guys if they just painted him exactly like the vintage one. The reissue is also stamped 2015. So everybody is from 2013 except for Bebop and Rocksteady, who were made in 2015. So these guys are wonderful. Rocksteady's definitely my favorite. I'm very happy with these figures. With the exception of some minor differences like paint apps, Shredder probably had the most drastic changes with the entirely newly sculpted legs. Bebop with the unpainted legs, and everybody else is pretty close and pretty spot on with the vintage counterparts. Like I said earlier, you're not going to beat that $10 price point. There's just no way. And if you want your children to experience the same thing that you did growing up, this is your chance. Buy these and gift them to your kid. Buying these guys and keeping them mint on card for display is definitely well worth the price point. These are just wonderful toys, and they hold up. Even 30 years later, they hold up very well. I am thrilled that they've decided to reissue these guys. Even though all the figures in this wave have been reissued before, it leaves me hope that they will continue to reissue more. This has been an exhausting unboxing and review of the newest wave of TMNT reissued Playmates figures. And I am UR Supreme Toys. Thank you so much for watching.